So check this out. Most of these sets I think are very few of them are first to twos. Very few of them happen outside of a loser's final, grand final, or winner's final. There are some, but what really got me thinking about this was when Gino was talking about, Daigo versus Ogawa when that happened at Toshingeki Tots. Recently, Sejam had a stream where he was talking about the best sets for all the games that he's kind of watched or paid attention to. It got me kind of thinking about sets that I watched and times when I watched the game and it really made me feel something. While this isn't like meant to be a definitive list, if you disagree, that's cool, right? So what I wanted to go over was this. First of all, honorable mentions. Yeah, this was a classic one. Oh, so the rules real quick. First of all, I did not pick any online sets. Number 2, I did not pick any sets from the Arc Revel World Tour. So Daimendo vs KV at Anime Ascension. This is kind of a fun one, right? It wasn't like, I guess it was kind of serious for KV's side, but it's fun because it's what Slayer versus Johnny. There's a lot of like funny, I think, outside the game interactions between Day and KV. Obviously, the way it ends too is kind of it's emotional on both sides, I think. But this was also another example of two players who were, at that time, I think, really emerging from their respective regions as some of the top talent in North America, and you got to see them face off in a grand final. Another good one to me was, Deb versus Marlon Pie happened last year at EVO. This was the year that GG was a side tournament, but again, same kind of story, right? Really good back and forth. This was in grand finals. This was Soul versus Ino as well. Marlon playing Ino, of course, Deb playing Soul. But Deb for a while was, I would say in the past like 2 to 3 years specifically, made a lot of growth on big stages, had some really big moments. This was the one that, to me, kind of cemented it. Winning an EVO, even though it was a side tournament, still had, very high entry numbers, That's the thing, man. This game still kind of delivered with entry numbers at a lot of big tournaments. I thought this one was kind of an honorable mention. This one was also really good. Daru versus Teresa at Combo Breaker a few years ago, this grand final. Kind of an oddball match, right? Jam versus Ino. You don't really see that too often, I feel. The back and forth of it, the final bracket reset, this was grand finals. The way the neutral RPS kind of developed, especially around like Jam Far S versus Ino's Dash, and then going under Horizontal Chemical Love, things like that. A lot of emotion. It was fun. It's an interesting matchup. I think it's fun to watch. Pretty shitty set in the way that it ends, but I think these are my honorable mentions. So the one I want to start off my list with, I didn't really put them in the order, I guess, aside from like the top 2 or 3, but this is just the sets that over the years kind of made me feel some kind of way when I watched them. So the first one I want to bring up is this one. And yes, I'm cheating, but I gotta do it this way. I'm sorry. I apologize in advance. KV versus Matchable from EVO 2017. And this was really good because KV, we just went over Anime Ascension, where KV, I think, went into grand finals thinking prime position to win. I don't think anybody really had him pegged to eliminate the defending EVO champion off stream like this, and especially in the way that he did, right? Johnny versus Sin. And this was at the time where Matchable, right, kind of, don't want to say took a back seat, but definitely kind of went away from the game for a little bit. Wasn't practicing as heavily. Figured he was good enough to just walk in there and just still win it all, And he definitely got spoiled, and in the best way possible. This was a really fun set to watch. KV made some really good calls. Really good defense. Used Johnny's strengths to just come out with a win, pretty much. The other one that I want to put at spot number 10 is this one. Nage versus Matchable, and in fact, this is cool because it's kind of like a little mini saga, is especially up until this point where Matchable had been going with Sin. Xrd Sign, Xrd Rev 1. Matchable had consistently been able to beat Nage in big tournaments, and the way Nage has gone through this game is he runs into a player at the highest level that consistently gives him a problem. He eventually grinds hard enough to where he's able to overcome them, and then they're no longer a problem. He had the same kind of interaction with Ogawa. Eventually it becomes Matchable, right? And you got to remember, this is right at the time where Matchable puts out that statement where, I won EVO the previous year, it brought me no happiness, so I'm going to play Street Fighter V now, right? You have to understand, on some level, that definitely lit a fire under some people's asses too. Especially because one of the questions in that interview was, who do you view as your rival or your biggest competition? He said Omito. He didn't say anybody else. Nage goes into this match, finishes him off game 1, lets him know what time it is and that he's here for business. And you got to remember, this is after they had played at Matchable eliminates him, I think, or beats him at KSB. At the Fighting Game Award Show, beats him in a long set. It comes down to this EVO, and the saga isn't over, by the way. They actually play again at EVO Japan after this, but this set to me was the one where he finally gets over the hump, and he finally is able to conquer Matchable, and it's in a very dramatic way. This is a really good set, both of these. Number 9, the one that I wanted to talk about was Karinsu versus Omito. This was really cool because it happened at a time where Karinsu, who was pretty much the best Johnny in East Japan, versus Omito, who was the best in West Japan. Both of them the best players of that character, but both with kind of unique and different styles too. Karinsu was more of kind of a bully, getting into that space where he could really control, just dominate you and keep you just maul you with Johnny's normals. Omito goes into this set. This is a 1-to-5 set, and he goes in with really strong defense. I mean, some of the best just guarding, instant blocking against one of the most busted forms of this character. The interesting stat to me is throws. Karinsu is able to throw Omito 5 times in 7 games, right? This is a set that goes 7 games. He gets 5 throws. Omito throws him 20 times. He pretty much played Johnny like a grappler. And somehow, just with the way the game is, when you get rewarded off of your throws like that, I mean, it worked. He pretty much got a game and a half worth of health just off of throws alone. But his defense really showed too. This was a really exciting set at the time. Nobody had really seen Karinsu lose in a long set like that up until this one. And this one happened it was a very convincing kind of win too. The next one I wanted to talk about was this one. So Giuna did a video on Ogawa versus Daigo. So obviously for that event, Toshingeki Totsu, it was kind of a weird, the way they organized, kind of half-baked. They're this is a pro gamers, but then they have people who are not pros, and then they have these GG players and random, whatever. Doesn't matter. Daigo versus Ogawa, that's obviously going to steal the show, right? Daigo's name is on it. That's all you're going to talk about. But actually, Mochi versus Takehara, this was, in my opinion, one of the stronger sets out of that exhibition. In particular, because both of these players are, again, it's another East-West matchup, right? Takehara, in particular, his defense, reactions, air control, the neutral in this game is so interesting. And remember, this is Sign 1.0, this is console release. Something that stood out about him was both of these players don't really get out to travel that much. So seeing them on a big stage like this was really cool. And then playing against each other, in a 1-to-3, competitive 1-to-3 like that. The thing that stood out to me was kind of the way that Takehara set up for sword sets against Mochi, because Mochi's reactions, his neutral, his decision-making are so unique. They're very hard to emulate. It's very difficult for players to watch him play and I think try to get a sense for how to play some of these characters or whatever. But Takehara found a way to kind of use a lot of his natural reactions against him. Right, in particular with wire C baits, his air movement was very elusive. Right, he would do a lot of neutral jump. Yes, please come inward. After he already has a sword set, backdash wire C, swing the sword. He would get the hit on Mochi. It's some really interesting interactions, and the set was, in one word, I think footsies. But this was another really good one in my opinion. Another one that stands out to me is Lost Soul versus Nage Evo 2018. This was losers semis. This was a 1-to-2. It's cool because one reason why this match kind of stood out to me was because of the context of it, right? So you have Evo 2015. Zidane makes that crazy run to get in the top 8 in a very stacked Guilty Gear Xrd sign tournament. And the big thing was, up until this point, this was mostly the kind of game where, a lot of people were like, this is a Japanese game. Players overseas cannot compete. Players overseas can't hang. They had the arcade period where they grinded out. But then you consistently had players overseas challenge that notion year after year, right? 2016, Marlon Pye carries the torch. He gets it done. Year after that, nobody gets it done, but a lot of people were real close, right? 2017, you had more international players in the top 32 than you had any of the years previous. 2018, what happens? Lost Soul not only takes that torch, hits the ceiling, he busts that bitch wide open. He goes up against Nage in top 8. First of all, his defense. His defense was incredible. Elfelt has a lot of built-in movement, but his anti-airs, his movement really stood out to me as well. His guard was really strong this set. His Yomi. He knew when Nage wanted to move, and he knew where Nage wanted to move. Most of the time, he was right. Whenever he went into rifle stance, he was so good at being able to control where Nage could move. And if he did, he usually made him pay for it. There was a lot of things that Lost Soul did really well in the set. And for him to beat the Evo Japan champion, beat Nage of all players, it's a really good bookend, I think, for the international community. It's kind of unfortunate with this game, but it's I don't think the game really got the respect that it deserved, to be honest with you. The international showdowns for this game were very fun, very exciting. You didn't get that many. Combo breakers and not really CEOs, but kinda. See, the problem with those is they usually just turn into Kazunoko Dogura and whoever, going in like that, right? The depth of field is far greater than just those 2 or 3 players, to the point where I would consider it a really deep international showdown. Evo really was the biggest battleground like that, I think, year after year. That's one reason why it stood out to me. The other one that I wanted to talk about was this one. Mochi versus Karinsu. Tenkaichi Budokai series, this was a 1 to 10 exhibition, and it pretty much came down to this one, bruh. And you know, I guess there's something about this matchup too. Maybe it's the character matchup. So, Soul, this is a hard matchup for him, right? I guess the way the matchup is and the way the characters are. It's like, if the Soul player is able to get a sense of timing for the Johnny player's habits, when they like to go for certain misfiner pressure or misfiner cancels, how they like to move. The thing about it is Soul is so damaging and so punishing, and then he could put you in a fucked up situation. The corner carry's there. The damage is there. If the Yomi and the reads are on point like that, with some patience, time and time again, you see players that pick this character in this matchup, and they're able to make it really, more than anything else, they make it really fucking fun. This goes down to the goddamn wire, dude, to the very last round. And it's the way that it happens too, right? Really good reactions, really good just neutral, certain call-outs. It takes him a while to get that engine revving, but Mochi makes this set really, really fun to watch. And like I said, it's a lot of pinpoint like swings. Okay, if this Johnny player uses this attack in this situation, then he gets to resume pressure as normal. But if the Soul player knows he's going to do this, he's going to lose 60% of his health. He's going to be in the corner. He's going to have meter. And he's going to have this dude eat a Gunflame Wire C-Mix or whatever. It creates a lot of rounds that are very intense and can very, very easily just be swayed one way or the other. Man, this was one of the first sets where you're like, damn, that was a set, you know what I mean? Anyway, the next one is, oh yeah, this one. You have Mochi versus Karinsu, right? Straight off of Rev 1. We move into late Rev 1 and Rev 2. Mika 10-2. Hawken versus Karinsu. Spoiler, Mochi loses against Karinsu. He got the closest. It was a hell of a set. One bad drop and it cost him. Spoiler. But Hawken took that torch and ran with it. This set, the first time they play, Hawken versus Karinsu is in a similar way really, really exciting, right? We already talked about the character dynamic. But what makes it so fun is Hawken's style is so different from Mochi's. And yet, he takes those lessons and makes it work in his own way. Hawken style, you know, when you talk about how different they play, Hawken in general was very, very strong with being able to switch up his guard between faultless defense and instant block. A lot more patient, a lot more defensive, but more pinpoint. He's able to find those gaps, and when he finds those gaps, he makes a very, very strong decision. He's not afraid to commit necessarily, but generally, his Potemkin background, you can definitely see it in terms of his movement. And in terms of how he kind of approaches neutral, right? Very heavy on guard, very heavy on patience, very heavy on instant block. Kind of passive in some situations, at least at the start, up until the point where he has a read, and then he just makes some very strong call-outs. And again, it's like I said before, the thing with this character is, if he gets those call-outs and he's right, he can cash in. He'll take you to the casino every time. This set was also really fun to watch in a similar way, and you know, has a different ending, obviously. But it was cool also because you had Karinsu in a position where, you know, he lost to Omito at that 1 to 5 at Battlemania, but he was still kind of considered, you know, the top dog in East Japan. Hawken was one of the first to put him on his back in a long set like that. And man, just the way it happens, dude, it's really fun. Dude, you literally get to watch a player hit that mental breaking point, you know what I'm saying? Where they visibly get frustrated. And for a player who was just used to just going into the arcades and just constantly bullying people, taking your coins like that, when you see them hit that point where they start to crumble, when they start to become less conscious of their own habits and stuff like that, it's fun to watch, you know what I mean? So the next one, you could probably guess this one, the classic. So you know, it's beyond ESPN top 10 on SportsCenter, right? We're not even talking about that part. I'm talking about Ogawa as an East Japan representative, and I'm talking about Woshige as a West Japan representative. And this was the only time you got this matchup on a big stage, and it's an important matchup. Both of these players are long-standing veterans, some of the strongest players to come out of their respective regions. And you only ever got it one time. And I guess, to be fair, it went down in a way. It's kind of weird, right? Like, from a gameplay perspective, you're like, man, it was on point for the 2.5 games. I don't know what happened that one round, but this was the last time you ever got to see this kind of matchup, because, you know, Woshige obviously is famously part of the Street Fighter V development team. He was unable to compete for whatever reason. I don't know if it was personal code or Capcom. Well, I guess that would make sense. Maybe because they wouldn't want him to compete in another rival developer's game series, right? I guess it could be seen as promotion, maybe in some corporate cultures. But you never really got this matchup ever again. And so the one time I look back on it, it feels kind of special now when you think about it, right? Those first 2 games, the back and forth and the adaptation, it's a very fast-paced match, actually, you know? Zato versus Milia, the way it plays out. Moshige's movement, his movement really stands out to me. Ogawa, when he's able to finally catch her, the pressure and the way he plays with meter, I think there's a good, really good burst bait in some situation too. This is a really fun one to watch. It's pretty intense. Not even talking about the ending and what happens after, right? That one's a classic for me. Mikaten 3. This is Omito versus Hawken 1, the first time they play. Obviously, you know, Omito, Evo champion at this point. Nobody can beat him, right? Everybody's having trouble getting him off the sticks at any time he sits down and wants to play a long set. This matchup was fireworks. This was brilliant. In a very similar way to what he did to Karinsu, he somehow finds a way to beat Omito. And again, Soul vs. Johnny, right? There's something about this matchup. There's something about the players. There's something about the characters. It just has a way to just be really exciting and really fun to watch every time. I don't know. I can maybe guess, but there's just... I wouldn't even think to, like, I go out of my way to watch this matchup, but when you think about it, it makes a lot of sense. Hawken in particular, like I said, he brings his kind of naturally defensive style, right? Heavy emphasis on, again, instant blocking, faultless defense, really good footsies, really good neutral. Use of sweep in mid-range, too. That stood out. Really good call-outs on certain misfiner cancels with Bandit Bringer. This was a really, really, really fun match to watch. I feel like I'm saying the same stuff for all of them, but it's just true. It's true, man. It's fast-paced. It's fun to watch. It can kind of slow down, but the thing is, because there's so much firepower on each side, it still never loses that intensity. It still feels very exciting the whole time, really, up until somebody lands a big hit. They lose like 80% of their life and get put in the corner, right? This was another really, really special match. So by now I've covered, what, like roughly 8 or so? It would feel silly if I didn't put this one up. And it's crazy now when I think about it. You ever have that thing where you don't notice something at a certain time, but then someone tells you about something later, and you look back and you're like, that's what that was? Oh man, you start to think about it. There were all those moments where you had those signs and stuff. But yeah, these two, they don't like each other, right? They played a first to 10 for Kimono Michi, and the thing about Ogawa is this, right? From my experience with him, it's very difficult for you to motivate him to do something. But when he feels like he wants to do something, he is very, very obsessive in a respectful way. This, for all intents and purposes, was his driving motivation. He was willing to do whatever he had to do to win. Matchable, what he's done, what he said, or whatever. Personal motivation like that pushed him to the edge. He got pretty much all the Kai players to just grind it out with him. They broke down this character and pretty much like how to create a winning pattern, because he was going up against Matchable. And Matchable at this point, you know, he has dropped Sin at this point. He's back on Kai full time. This is like reborn Matchable, essentially. He as well, you know, he made it well known. You know, with Kimono Michi trailers, man, especially the first two, they ham it up a little bit, right? They talk a little bit of shit. You can tell it's like, you know, it's hyped up or edited or whatever. But it wouldn't surprise me if 100% of that came from the heart. You could tell they definitely wanted to play each other, and they definitely wanted to leave it all on the table. And the way it plays out, you get to see two characters. Literally, this matchup is played at the highest possible level, to the point where a lot of it boils down to movement, tech, and burst Yomi points. There's a lot of that going back and forth. You can watch both of these players play this matchup, and you can learn certain things about the opposing character's pressure from start to finish. This one was lights out. You know, Daigo knew what he was doing when he picked this one. I'm jealous he got it, and well, we didn't get to do it in Mikado, to be honest with you. This was definitely one of the best sets of Guilty Gear Xrd, period. So that leaves us with the last one. You guys, I'm sure you already know what I'm going to say. I guess it's not one set, right? But for me, it's a saga. A matchup that developed over the course of the game that, in my opinion, you know, like I said before, bro, it's like if you've ever played a game like some of these other games from some of these other communities where there is a very strong sense of regional rivalry. In particular, I always take it back to Marvel vs. Capcom 2, right? Because East Coast, West Coast, blah, 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 blah. You know, some other communities do it too, right? But this is the closest that I think you were going to get to that in the modern era. So the thing is this. Tekken, Under Night, and this game were the last really like arcade games, you know, out of the modern titles. I don't think you'll ever get a rivalry that felt quite like this one. You know, this had been boiling for years. It goes back to the KSB where Matchable wins. He beats Omito, he beats Nage. He wins Evo. he only nominates, Omito as his number one challenger or something like that. It was always about these two. The most motivated player from East Japan, Nage, versus the most motivated and, eventual Evo champ, both these guys Evo champions, but Omito, right, out of West Japan. So when you get that East versus West flavor, and this is something a lot of players have talked about over the years over here too, it's not quite as the way it used to be in terms of its intensity, I guess, because a lot of these players have been playing for a long time. They get to know each other. You become a little bit less, like aggressive. You start to it becomes like friendly banter as opposed to just like, that kind of pride. And I'm not implying that these two have like that kind of, like there's a hate or anything like that. It's not that. It's the point is that kind of rivalry for the most part is lost. This is really the last kind of key or last example that you will see of that, I think, with a lot of modern games. Not only that, man, but just the way the sets play out. Two of the best players of their characters going at it, and it boils down to, again, every neutral decision is made in a way to where they're usually as risk averse as possible, and you're trying to lure someone else into a misstep or being in a range where they would get intercepted. A lot of their matchups boil down to just, again, movement Yomi, burst Yomi, and air tech Yomi. And so the way the saga goes too is Nage loses at KSB to him, and then he loses in Mikaten in another very close set. Their first at 10. That's what I'm saying. I'm not saying just one set, by the way. I'm saying like the whole package. The whole thing from start to finish is great. Their Mikaten 3 set. That was straight up one of the best fighting game sets of the past 5 or 6 years. Straight up. So you have that, and then you go the next weekend, they're playing in grand finals at EVO Japan, and it was, man, that was a blast. I don't even have to tell you, man. Y'all already know. EVO Japan 2018, all you got to do is look it up. That was a fun-ass set to do, man. I don't know if I'll ever get another one quite like that. To me, it was a really good opening to the closing chapter of the game, I think, when you got to see the resolution of East Coast versus West Coast Japan in this game, where that's still really kind of a thing, and the closing to that kind of arcade legacy, because I don't think Strive will quite have that same thing, that same feeling. If this was how it ended, if this and EVO 8 2018 were the bookends for the game, it wasn't bad, man. That was a good ride, good game. That's all the sets that I wanted to talk about. But if I missed any, right, maybe or maybe you thought Maximilian versus Hotashi was the hot shit. Clever Fox Soul versus I don't know, one of his subscribers, that was the good stuff. Let me know about it in the comments below, and we'll talk about it. I'll give it some consideration. Anyway, I'll holler at y'all later. Be good.